Good morning and welcome to Adventist Risk Management's sixth webinar on crisis communication. My name is Kurth Lampe. I am the Manager for Marketing and Communication here at ARM, and we're just grateful that you are with us today for this webinar. And if you've been with us for this whole series, you know that you are in for a treat. This series has been presented by Kurth Lampe Worldwide, with Kevin Lampe and Greg Dunn, and we're excited to have them with us again today. I'll turn it over to you guys in just a minute. I want to take care of some housekeeping items first. As I said, this is part of a whole series on crisis communication, and if you have missed the first few episodes of this, you can still catch up. There is still time to enjoy the wisdom that Greg and Kevin have given us already. That is on our website, adventistrisk.org, and you can look under safety resources for the webinars videos page, and that all of those webinars are there, along with a lot of great other webinars and content. We have one more in this series, and I think based on the way that it has kind of kept coming up during many of the other webinars, this is probably going to be one of the highlights. I think we've maybe saved the best for last, but that will be on May 7, and the topic there is how to talk or not to the media. It's a Media 101, and really going over if you should talk to the media, how do you do that effectively and efficiently. So you can also register for that on the website there under the webinars and videos page, adventistrisk.org. Go to safety resources. Again, if you've been with us for one of these webinars in the past, you'll know that we offer an interactive poll a couple of times during the webinar. You'll see that pop up on your screen and vote. That gives us some real-time feedback on some of your preparedness for communications, and so watch for that. We also are going to be taking questions at the end. Our Vice President for Client Care, David Fournier, will be with us to answer any questions that are ARM specific, but of course Greg and Kevin will answer your communication questions. You can ask us those anytime during the webinar by clicking on the questions, the Q&A button down at the bottom, and typing in your question. I think with that, Greg, we are going to turn the time over to you guys, and thank you so much. I'll come back at the end for Q&A, but we just appreciate you being with us here again today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And we're excited to be able to present the sixth in our series of webinars. This one, Integrating Crisis Managed Operations and Communications. And in this particular seminar, you will learn the importance of having a crisis communications plan. But, excuse me here. But the importance of having this plan is you want to make sure that your operations are integrated with your business continuity planning as well, and understanding the role of communications within some specific scenarios, and to identify the linkages and the responsibilities. For those of us who are new, and those of us who have been working with us for the past other seminars, I'm Kevin Lampe with Kurth Lampe Worldwide. We are a strategic communications firm which helps our clients take complicated ideas and turn them into compelling messages, and help to train the messenger, as well as a deep experience in the field of crisis communications. And my colleague here is Greg Dunn.
Great to be with everybody again. And as Kevin indicated, for any of you who may be new today, I'm an Andrews University graduate, like undoubtedly some of you on this call. Also a Pathfinder dad. I love to share that because I love Pathfinders. I've had 3 kids in Pathfinders, and but on a professional, from my professional background, I have spent most of my career in large public relations agencies, really in the realm of corporate reputation, issues management, crisis communications. A lot of the things that have sort of served as a foundation, and to complement Kevin's expertise from a media and communication standpoint. So that has sort of underpinned what what we are sharing with you in this webinar series, and we're happy to be back with you again today.
As we like to do in these seminars, we like to throw up some quotes here. And Greg, I'll let you take the last two, but expect the best, plan for the worst, and prepare to be surprised.
Yeah, and I think, the point here is not just clever sayings, although we do like the clever sayings, but, planning, there's a famous quote, and I'm going to blank on it, Kevin, so if you know it, feel free to correct me, but a famous quote about, the best laid battle plan not surviving first contact with the enemy. And yet you still need to have that plan, because that puts you in the right frame of mind. It certainly helps point you in the right direction, but you do have to be flexible and ready to make adjustments along the way. Now, in terms of, today is another conversation about planning, and we found some relevant words of wisdom in the Bible. No surprise, Proverbs 5:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. And I think, what I take away from that is, communications planning, business continuity planning, the integration of those disciplines is not best done in a silo by one person sitting at a desk. It's really leavened effectively by, the seasoning, the expertise of experts across the organization. And then finally, here in the middle, Ecclesiastes 6:11, the more words, the less the meaning. And from that, I think we would take away, you don't necessarily need a 100-page plan. What you need is a concise, clearly conveyed set of plans to help you get to where you need to be. So less can be more. More is not always more.
Now, we want to take a quick moment to take a look at what we've learned so far. Now is the time to build and enhance your reputation. We learned that in the first seminar. We then moved on to take time to understand what issues are facing your organization, and the time to prevent an issue from becoming a crisis. And then social media is timely, but also permanent, and how to manage the first 60 minutes of time in a crisis. These are all things that we've talked about in our previous seminars. And our first poll question, does your organization have a business continuity plan? It is up on your screen, and you can vote and put in your thoughts and add them to this poll as we begin our seminar today. So we're tabulating results here. Hopefully people are being able to vote. If you have any problems or any concerns, there is a chat window at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can interact with everyone, and that will do it. And so, all right, and well, this is okay. So 31% have a business continuity plan, 58% do not, and 12% need to learn more about what a business continuity plan is. So we definitely have some opportunities here for everybody to join in and to take a look at what it takes to build a business continuity plan.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So this is actually then apparently a very timely topic that we're speaking about today. Are we able to take down the poll results? Business continuity planning, crisis operations planning can be sort of interchangeable terms. And the basic idea is that we've spent obviously the first 5 parts of this webinar series really talking about various aspects of issues management and crisis communication. And I think the big takeaway we hope to leave you with today is what is the role of crisis communication when it's time to execute during an actual crisis. And that's sort of where the business continuity planning comes in. So, a crisis communication plan in a vacuum is still needed and necessary, but it's not really enough. There has to be a larger plan that specifically addresses what happens, if something happens, if you have multiple locations and there's a flood or an earthquake at one of your locations, or there's some other disaster that, where non-communication behaviors and other elements have to be addressed. That's what goes into a business continuity plan. And what we're here to talk about today is how to ensure that the crisis communications planning is baked into that larger business continuity plan, because you're going to need to address the scenarios, you're going to need to address all of the events that would be identified in a business continuity plan. Otherwise, the crisis communication plan risks being marginalized when it's time for people to actually act and communicate. So what goes into a business continuity plan? Well, various elements, but thinking through, and again, we're faith-based organizations, we're not Fortune 500 corporations, but thinking through the possible impact on your operations, on your ability to continue to function in a specific potentially dire situation. So if an earthquake is to happen, if something is to happen, a fire, this is the part that's not necessarily communication specific, but is also vital to your ongoing ability to function. And so you think through those scenarios, you think through the impact on your line of command, on your operations. You have plans A, B, and C. You put all that into a plan. And then, we can't emphasize enough, and we'll go into more detail a little bit later today, but test, because, to do this once and to route it for approval and to get the head of the organization and the attorneys to sign off on it is great. But if it's just up on a shelf and people forget about it, you'll never be able to execute effectively when the time comes. So again, we've gone into elements of this at length in our previous webinars, but just to sort of refresh, and again, thinking from a fresh point of view in the context of the business continuity plan, what do we need to contain in that crisis communication plan, and how does that bake into the larger business continuity plan? Remind people of the purpose and procedures of why we are setting up these protocols, why we are laying out this plan. You may still have people who are wondering, why are we even talking about crisis communications plans at this point in time? We're doing great. But your plan should remind people, should bring people back to the really fundamental, critically important principle that a crisis communication plan is a hugely significant part of risk management, okay, of reducing your risk and exposure on a variety of scenarios that frankly can be anticipated. Now, we've talked about there are crises that can come out of, that are completely unexpected, but you can still prepare generally for those types of unanticipated, significant events. So within your plan, again, delineate the crisis communication team. This will be experts across the organization, potential spokespeople, people with specific expertise that will feed into the various elements of the communication and business continuity plans. You can develop messages generally that sort of convey who your organization is, and you can start to map out messaging directions that you'll probably have to tweak in the event, to align perfectly with a given scenario. But you can start to map out those messages. It will save time. It will be more efficient when you're actually in the heat of the moment. Your crisis communications plan, again, as a reminder, you'll need to have a very detailed set of instructions and contacts in terms of how to reach your employees. I mean, all stakeholders, certainly, but obviously it will be critical. If your server goes down, if there's something that interrupts your ability to communicate with employees through normal channels, what are the backup scenarios? What are the backup methods to get to your plan, to your employees? Can you get to them by text messages, home telephones? So have multiple ways laid out to contact people in the event of said crisis. Contacts and media list. Again, this goes not just employees, but to other stakeholders, city officials, conference officials, union leadership, you know, all the people that you would need to collaborate with and communicate with in the event of something really unfortunate. Also to have that media list, because whether you get a call from the media or it's deemed appropriate for you to proactively reach out to share a holding statement or to share a press release to keep the media informed if there's community impact, you got to have all of that information chronicled well in advance and housed within your communication plan. And then within this plan, you also have lots of working documents. You have additional guidelines, checklists that walk you through, you know, when X happens, Y needs to happen, different forms to provide, you know, the full array of information that you'll need to factor into your plans when the time comes.
And so this plan is kind of a layers within layers. The communications elements of this plan are somewhat like an onion. You know, how you peel back and you see those various layers, but all the layers are important to maintain the composition, you know, of the onion. So there are plans, and there's plans within plans, and with the community within the communications plan. Also, you want to make sure you've got a social crisis plan, a media plan, an internal communications plan. All of these plans within plans. And these
Yeah, I've heard
layers,
this, Kevin, if I can just interject. So I've heard this referred to, another way to think about it is sort of Russian nesting dolls, right? Because each piece fits nicely within another piece of the plan. And if any one piece is missing, you know, you don't have necessarily a cohesive plan against which to operate.
now these layers are crucial to make sure that within a large business, that business continuity and crisis response is working together, working cohesively. Both sides need to be working together, need to be part of the team, because if they're separate, people could be going in two different directions, and that's always going to be frustrating and will injure the organization in the long run. And everybody must know what is the primary mode of communication and where information is housed. Now, this sounds very, very basic and simple, but we've seen it time and time again where people don't know. Are we communicating through a Slack program? Are we communicating through text messaging? Are we communicating through cell phones? And also, where is all the information stored? Yes, it should be online, but as even if you've seen in this call, you know, the internet and the speed of the internet can interrupt things that are going on. And so we have to make sure that we know where the information is, because if the hard drive fails or the server fails, you need written communications, and you need to know where they are, quite down to, okay, this is in this office, this is in the top file cabinet on the right hand side, it's the third file in.
Yes. So I think, you know, part of the point there is written communications are very important, certainly because you never know when you may not have internet access. And yet at the same time, with modern technology, we have access to the cloud to house materials, right? So in case you are somewhere, you're caught somewhere traveling, you know, you're on vacation or something, and something unforeseen happens, you may not have, you likely will not have your crisis binder with you, but you will know where in Dropbox or wherever that you have access to, you know, the checklist, the contact information, how to move forward as a team, so on and so forth. So again, going a little bit further down this notion of making technology work for you, I wish we had thought to include a poll question here, Kevin, but Microsoft Teams is becoming increasingly popular as a way to link folks within an organization. And if you don't currently use Microsoft Teams, I would encourage you to check it out. There's great ways. You can chat on Microsoft Teams. You can have folders where you can file all of your pertinent information. It's just really sort of a great multi-purpose platform for linking, you know, for example, members of the crisis team, or, you know, small groups of small work streams within the organization that you might want to tap into and bring together as part of the business continuity and crisis communications planning process. There's also an app that's getting some traction called Social Chorus that a lot of organizations are finding useful and would be worth your investigating as well. Sorry, had a little space out there. So ultimately, what you want to make sure you do with through Microsoft Teams, through Social Chorus, through email, through other channels that you communicate with folks, is to make sure not only are you just communicating with them during a time where business is at risk of being disrupted, but you want to make sure that your messaging is pushing people to the right documents and action steps. So you don't want people to be paralyzed, obviously, when it's time to act. You really want to make sure that you are directing people to the places and actions that are of greatest need in that point of during that pain point. So look at your existing channels, your email. If you have the ability to text and you're prepared to put out group texts to your crisis team, that you have everybody linked in on those mechanisms, have multiple ways to reach your stakeholders, to those you're going to need to rely on during the course of a crisis and to hopefully prevent any kind of business disruption. So again, you're going to communicate with them, but not just for the sake of communicating with them. You're going to keep pushing people in the direction of current information, updated information, where they can access, as a refresher, everything that they need to understand, to know that you need from them to do next. So always think through the purpose of the content. We never want to just, risk becoming clutter and communicating for the sake of communicating, but we're pushing people towards specific information.
And let me throw in something interesting here that I've noticed is happening within my life and my family. As some of you saw, Kitty Kurth on the presentation last week. She is my wife and boss at both home and office. But we've been watching a lot of British television lately, and we've started to acquire British phrases for different things. In fact, we're starting to use, the phrase sorting stuff out or get that sorted. So be aware of your written word. In one of my favorite examples to talk about the difference between American English and British English, though, to say is that in British English, it's okay to call something a scheme. But in American English, a scheme is something that is said between criminals. And so, understanding the language, understanding the words that you're using, and make sure that they are clear and understandable by the entire audience that you are communicating to. And so this now will take us to our second poll question. When it comes to plan development, what is your preferred option? Develop business continuity and crisis communications plans independently. Develop business continuity and crisis communications plans concurrently. Business communication plan first, but should inform crisis communications plan, or just not sure. Go ahead and put in your answer to this poll question, and we will look at the results here in just a moment. So these poll questions, we've enjoyed doing these poll questions and having this ability to interact with everybody to let us know what they're thinking. We've learned many things through these poll questions throughout the course of these webinars, and it's a great. We're talking about platforms to communicate. The Zoom platform allows you to be able to do these types of polls so that you can be in a presentation. You can be getting some feedback from people that are viewing. And it's a fact that when I looked over the list the other day, it was exciting that this is that we're definitely doing a global presentation, and that's heartwarming to me.
I love that.
And so it is exciting to see the reach of this and the fact that we are communicating with so many people, and hopefully they've learned something. But here is what we've got. We developed the plans independently, only 6%, and developed the plans concurrently, 68%, and 4% communications first, and then, but also 15% not sure. And that's hopefully what we will get you to at the end of this webinar today, that you'll understand the interconnectedness of these plans and how they should be meshed together.
Yeah, this is great to see, because we would, and again, based on our background and on best practices, B would be the preferred answer. That nothing gets done in a vacuum. I sort of alluded to this at the outset that if the business operation, the business continuity team is over here on one side or in one conference room, planning for worst case scenarios and how to keep going, and the crisis communication team is somewhere else in the building, and checking all the boxes and addressing all the points that you're supposed to address in a crisis communication plan, but they don't actually specifically align with what's happening on the business continuity planning side, then you risk severely being hampered when a crisis should hit. So if those plans are being developed concurrently and they are synced up together, that's what is going to put you in the best position. So the idea here is, we're not operating on separate planes, right? This is all interlinked and interwoven together, and we're really working on the same plane, on the same level. We're having dialogue about the same issues, and so that those critically important aspects of business continuity planning, the disasters that could impede your ability to continue operating, that you're also addressing that specifically within the context of the communications plan.
And Greg, I'm going to jump in here because there's an inadvertent typo in here, but I think it's actually a telling typo. There is a phrase I've been hearing a lot during this time period of, we are building the airplane as we're flying it. And which is there's another organization I'm working with, another national organization, and so the phrase that we've been using to help everybody understand what we're doing is, we are building the airplane as we fly it. And the reality is, it has to be one airplane. It can't be two separate airplanes, and these need to be integrated. Everybody needs to be together and working with each other.
So, we've got somebody leading the business continuity planning. We've got whomever the senior communications professional is in the organization, leading people through the crisis communications and issues management planning exercises. Who's in charge of bringing this all together? Well, not to disappoint those of us who are communicators, but probably not us. So it's unlikely that the communications folks will drive the overall business continuity planning and execution, but you're at the table. So the role of the communications team is to be a very strategic communicator. Certainly you'll have input into what's being addressed on the business continuity side, but maybe not necessarily in charge of the final product, although you'll certainly have a lot of input into the strategy, the communication strategy, and the pieces of the communication plan that ultimately get developed and integrated into the business continuity plan. So normally you would have somebody trained in risk management, somebody skilled at risk reduction, driving the business continuity plan. But strategic communication is going to be very, very vital, and you're going to be the folks that have the ability and the counsel on media inquiries, how to communicate with employees and other stakeholders. So who should contribute to one or both of these, planning planes, if you will? Every team in the organization that could be affected by disaster should be consulted when developing a plan. And frankly, that's just about every function within the organization, right, has the potential to be affected in some way, shape, or form. But you can certainly delineate, the areas of the organization that likely would be experiencing the greatest level of impact and effect, and that's really the key people you should have at the table. You certainly don't want to have everybody in the company at the table, but analyzing the likelihood of a scenario, the likely impact of a scenario, that will lead you toward who are the people who should be at the table for business continuity and crisis communications planning.
So what needs to be addressed? What needs to be in these plans? Every aspect of operations needs to be addressed in the business continuity plans and needs to be considered in the crisis communications. All the different areas, everything that is there, everything from, the operations from, opening and closing the buildings, client relationships, customer relationships, event planning, anything that's a part of what the daily functions are of the organization needs to be addressed. You need to figure out which operations can be affected. How will the operations be affected, and how will operations be restored? And you walk through each of these steps.
Sorry, Kevin, but actually, we're living through a time right now, aren't we, where I'm sure all of you are considering all of this. I mean, many of us, certainly here in Chicago, but also across the country, are quote unquote sheltering at home, and offices for the most part are either running with a very skeleton crew or temporarily closed while this coronavirus process gets worked through. And so this is very timely and topical. You're probably thinking about what's the point at which we'll be able to start returning to business as normal. But there's a whole lot of factors that go into that, right? I mean, one could be, many of you are likely in states or countries where there's official orders prohibiting any unnecessary travel to places like offices. Of course, hospitals and such are in the health systems are operating in a completely different realm, but this really gives us this is a situation where there's a global crisis, if you will, a crisis that affects everybody. Lots of organizations, it's not specific to our organization, but yet it's a potential crisis. It actually is a crisis for all of us. And now that we might not have, if we were sitting down to do business continuity planning 6 months ago, crisis communications planning, we might not have considered something like what's happening now. But this is a great time to sort of go to school on what has happened and what can we learn from this. What do we need to be thinking about today, as at some point in the coming months, the coronavirus begins to recede and we're able to start returning to business as usual. How are we going to do that? And if you haven't started planning that, this is really a great time to start planning around this issue in particular.
So what are the things that can trigger? What are the things that can start? What are the things that can make you put into place and to put into action your continuity crisis communications plans? What are the things that would start it? A state of emergency declaration, what many of us are under right now. An inquiry from a journalist or from a social media post that is asking you about something going on. Law enforcement involvement, whether it's an investigation into activities of a member or somebody related to the organization, or if it's something that happens to a member of the organization or a client or a student. Once law enforcement becomes involved, this plan needs to go into action. And then also mismanagement. Is it administrative or financial? What is something happens internally that could cause the plan to be needed to be triggered, needed to be put into place.
And Kevin, if you could just go back real quick, I just wanted to add. So these are just examples. I mean, all of these things, certainly could rise to the example of elements, unexpected events that could trigger specific aspects of your business continuity plan. But the larger point here is, think specifically about your organization, about the nature of your organization, from a faith-based perspective. What rises to the additional level of triggers that might initiate specific areas of the business continuity and crisis communications plan, and then make sure that you're addressing all of those and planning against those when you start to develop those plans.
All right, so testing. Here's the scenario to test whether you fully prepared. A structure has collapsed. There's no injuries, but it is uninhabitable. First thing you do, you gather that integrated crisis operations team. People from different operational parts of the organization bringing different expertises and experience. They're gathered literally either around the table, around the Zoom conference call, around the Microsoft Teams call, whatever your preferred and necessary option for making people communicate. Additionally, having a larger team and having a number of people involved means that you can manage the situation over a longer period of time, and also have the ability, if necessary, to manage and have somebody there, 24/7, so that they are there if something needs to be done, no matter what time it is and what day of the week it is. If you have having a variety of different experts, they'll encourage the realistic and financial, functional solutions. If it's, the collapse of a structure, you need somebody, from the engineering staff, or somebody that understands how the building was built, or understands that would be the nooks and crannies of the building. It may be somebody who's been there long, it's maybe somebody whose job is the maintenance responsibilities, but they understand what's going on. And team training is vital, so that the success of how you deal with the crisis will be how you have trained the team beforehand and how you have done this plan in advance. And bring multiple people. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so before we advance to the Q&A, I just want to, so we often refer to these types of exercises as tabletop drills. And not to put you on the spot, Kevin, but I know you've done exercises like this, and I mean, we both have, but I think it'd be helpful for the folks on the conference today to, take it down sort of to the types of actual activities that you might put people through their paces in a tabletop drill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. Okay, the building is collapsed. It's nobody can get in it. It's not habitable. All right. So we are going into our crisis plan. We are finding, we gather people around, we pull out the documents, whether they are, saved on the server, whether they are available on paper, and we pull that team together. And we start walking through our plan, both on the continuity side and the crisis side, and start realizing, okay, what are the first things we need to do? Obviously, we need to make sure that health and safety is taken care of. We want to make sure that people, that no one was injured. We know that from the scenario that no one was injured. We also know we can't get into the building. And so we can't function, the building cannot function as a place for gatherings, as a place for administrative activities to happen. Whatever the building houses, we need to figure out, okay, what can we start to do? We also need to, as you pointed out in the other seminar, the first 60 minutes, make sure that you engage your insurance counselors, your risk managers, and your legal team, so that they're involved in this process. And so your team is now gathered, and you're sitting around the table, either virtually or really. I've seen situations where people have had moved their operations to a hotel conference room, so that everybody could meet somewhere. And then you start to go through your plan step by step. Which of the different operations of the organization, how can we continue to live up to our mission? What is the things that are mission critical? What are the things that we have to do in order to maintain the services that we are providing to our clients, to our customers, to our members? And everybody contributes to that conversation, and you start to move forward on saying, okay, we need to do this today, we need to do this tonight, we need to do this tomorrow. The communications team is looking at how things are being communicated both internally and externally. The operations team is looking, okay, how quickly can the building be repaired? How quickly can we move back into that space? People that are doing programming, do we have to move these programs to virtual, as everybody has been doing in these times, and everybody has, right. Meetings have gone online. Have we tested the system and make sure that it works and knows its vulnerabilities? What we've learned, for instance, over the last 2 weeks, is that the increasing need for use of passwords on Zoom in order to protect the privacy and the confidence that people show within their conversations. And this is an ongoing process. And in this plan, you will then carry out each of the steps that you've already put down on paper, and you've already made sure that you've had these things ready to go. Exactly. So, as always, we've shared a lot of information with you, and we are here as a resource for you. And Chris, we will turn it back over to you for the last portion of today's presentation.
Yeah, and we just appreciate, again, such a timely, important thing. We planned these webinars out well in advance of knowing about coronavirus, but it seems like they have hit such a chord with the clients and members and me as well. I'm sitting here taking notes. I appreciate the presentation today. Just a reminder, if you have questions that you would like to ask Greg or Kevin, you can do that. There is a Q&A button down at the bottom, and you can send those to us either privately or everybody can see those as well. But the first question this morning, how do you balance the need for redundancy in case you lose access to the internet and those privacy concerns that paper documents can bring? How do you sort of balance those differences?
That it is a challenge, and I will say that Kitty Kurth, my wife here, has a favorite saying: "You need belt and suspenders." And it is a when you think of that, that certainly is one of the best ways to prevent the pants from falling down, and from a personal crisis occurring. And it is you need to secure the documents, and you need to also have password protection. You need to have electronic documents need to be in place. If there's a need for encryption, work with your IT person or work with your computer expert on how to make sure that documents can be behind a protected password wall. And to is it and then there's sometimes too that a plan can also the written plan that's available to the public can be written in larger terms, without sacrificing any privacy or any confidentiality. But I think Chris this is a terrific point. We need to be concerned always with the privacy, and the confidence that people put in us, and particularly in the areas where we all work. There's very sensitive information in all of this, and personal, and whether it's financial information or spiritual information. Or personal things, and so these things need to be protected, and we're always got to be looking at ways to protect that in the best way possible, and maybe as simple as a locked cabinet, but then make sure everybody's got the keys, which is the same thing. Make sure that people that need that there's redundancy on who has the passwords and the usernames. I've been in more than one meeting where I said, okay, we need to put something out on Twitter, and somebody says, oh, we don't know the password. So we'll wait. That should have been in the plan, and let's find out who's got the Twitter password. And so these things are all very, very key.
Yeah, great points there. Another question: how much and what types of communication pieces should be pre-produced as part of your business continuity plan versus done on the fly, I guess?
Right, and I think I'm glad that question was raised, because that really relates to a lot of what we're trying to convey through this series. There is much that can be done in advance, and the more that is able to be done in advance, the more effective we think overall risk management efforts will be. So, in the first webinar, we started talking about reputation and the importance of reputation. And by cultivating a positive reputation when a crisis does hit, the idea is that there will be less damage and less enduring damage because of the proactive time you have taken to make friends with your neighbors, to cultivate, goodwill from church members and from others in the community. But there are many things, again, this is, when you have the chance to go back to look at some of our earlier webinars, we talk a lot about, developing that communication strategy in advance, about mapping out the types of communications, or at least the start to communications in advance, knowing who the spokesperson is going to be. So really, the more you can do in advance, you think through these scenarios, you prioritize them in terms of impact and likelihood, and you can get a really significant head start developing the communications that you'll then want to tweak and tailor to a specific situation. But the more you do in advance in terms of cataloging the materials and types of messages you're going to need, and actually get a running start on those, the better off you will be when business continuity is threatened and you're in a crisis situation?
Message is always the key. With all of our clients, one of the first things that when we sit down and talk with them is like, what is the message you want to deliver? We work through some different exercises helping them to determine that message. But message, particularly in the context that we've had throughout these webinars, is interchangeable with reputation. You know, if you understand your reputation, you will understand the message that you're trying to deliver. Message is so important. People need to understand that from the very beginning and decide what our message would be. I encourage all organizations, particularly, go back and look at the reputation part of this, and look at what your reputation is. In that, you will understand and be able to determine your message, and so that those things can be there, set aside, so that you hope to get to the point where every member of your organization, if somebody walked up and goes, what is the message, what is the reputation of your organization, they'll be able to tell you exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Another question here, talking about the need for both internal and external communication. Should that really be a different message, or should that be one and the same message? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's generally very closely aligned. What might be different is the way in which the message is delivered, by whom it's delivered. But I think philosophically and strategically, those are almost always going to be aligned. I mean, there are things you will say to employees that you would not say externally. At the same time, as Kevin well knows, any message you send internally might as well be a message to the media, right? Because there's always going to be some enterprising employee who decides to share that. But that gets to, I think, part of the point of the question, which is, yes, very much, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it's going to be very much a synchronized message to both sets of audiences.
The U.S. Navy has seen that this week.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. It's a perfect example of a leader delivering the wrong message to the wrong crowd, and also not fully understanding that every single sailor on that ship had a smartphone. I can almost guarantee it. And everything is recordable and everything will be released. Early on in Kitty's career, she had a presidential candidate turn to her when she was a traveling press secretary and said, you know what, you need to always be careful, because whatever you say will end up on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah, and that actually gets us to a related point, which is, never, ever, ever should a person at that level be put out in front of in a setting like that without having been trained and prepared in advance. I mean, that was just catastrophic.
Yeah, and we have we pride ourselves when we prep clients in the past that that they've turned to us after they did the interview and said, your questions were harder than the journalist, and I say that was the point. We had an interesting comment in the chat here, which I appreciate, that how the word plain is also a math term that applies to this as well, and so language and the ability to adjust and to use language to the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if there are any more questions at this point. Again, we're just so grateful that you guys will take these questions. David, you have joined us. Do you have any questions or comments that you would like to give at this point?
No, just really enjoyed the webinar today. Appreciate both Kevin and Greg sharing their expertise on this. I love the harmony between how we can really marry our efforts from a communication standpoint with the business needs of our various organizations. And what I'm hearing too is just, if you know what you're here for, if you know what your mission is, and if you know what your values are, and you cannot spend enough time thinking through that, you will know what your message is. And you'll be able to respond, and you will be able to be prepared. You can spend your time preparing, no matter what kind of crisis comes up. Like Chris was saying a few minutes ago, none of us would have probably thought this is what we were going to be doing in April exactly. But I tell you what, I look at a crisis like this, and absolutely, it's a crisis. There are people hurting. There are very real challenges. This is a problem, but every challenge is an opportunity as well. And if you're in a position of leadership, I encourage you to look at this as an opportunity to reevaluate, what is my mission? What am I here to do? If I had to change a lot of things in order to meet my core mission, to do what I'm here to do, what would I do? Just as a mental exercise. Hopefully you won't have to do all that. But I think it's a really good time to orient ourselves and think through the principles of our leadership and our attitudes. Because our people, whether it's your constituents, whether it's your employees, whether it's your community, your attitude, more than anything else, how you relate to this crisis is going to say a lot about who you are. And they're not just looking at you as an individual, but as a representative of what you are leading. And each one of you are leaders. So we appreciate partnering with you, and I just hope that's an encouragement to you. It's meant as an encouragement. We've partnered with Kurth and Lampe here because we want to provide you resources and tools to give you something that maybe you didn't have before. Another opportunity to think through these kinds of potential issues. Didn't realize we might be exercising our skills quite this quickly, but we're praying for you. We're working for you, and I hope that you're encouraged in the middle of these interesting times. Your attitude is noticed, it's seen, and you can make a really, really positive difference right now. That's for sure. So thank you, Kevin and Greg, and thank you everyone who took the time to spend with us today. I appreciate what everyone's doing.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much.
We will see you back here May 7 for our final crisis communication webinar, how to talk to, and if you should, the media. So we'll see you at that point. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.